Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Monday, March 11th slate of college basketball DFS. We've got a four-game slate where we've got the semifinals of the Horizon League as well as the semifinals of the West Coast Conference. So these are four games that matter quite a bit. These teams are going to be playing with a great sense of urgency because they want to punch that automatic ticket into the NCAA tournament, which Selection Sunday is a week from today. Now, from the looks of it, this DFS slate is a little weird the way DraftKings did pricing. There's a lot of great options at the top, but what we're looking at is a lot of these teams, especially with it being conference tournament season, are playing very short rotations. They're not giving a whole lot of guys minutes, so there's not really a whole lot of value options here on the slate. So here in this episode, we're going to break down those potential value options. We're going to break down each game one by one and tell you who you need to be looking at for your DFS lineup, as well as how we expect every game to play out. So pretty much anything you need to know to build DFS lineups for this Monday slate, you're going to get here in this episode. Now, quick reminder, we will probably not have an episode for the Tuesday night slate. I'm going to Monday night be recording the golf episode for the Players' Championship. Check that out if you're interested in playing some golf DFS or betting or anything like that. But the Tuesday night slate is likely to just be the finals of these two tournaments, as well as probably some pillow fight games from the opening rounds of, the other power conference teams that start conference tournaments this week. So I don't think we're going to be missing much by not having a Tuesday slate, but I do expect to be back for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel so that way you can go ahead and get notifications when new episodes drop, and you can be here with us for the rest of conference championship week, as well as the rest of the NCAA tournament. We're going to have a lot of college basketball content coming your way. We are going to have a bracket breakdown show. We're going to have some live DFS shows. It's going to be a lot going on here in the next few weeks, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel and you won't miss any of it. Now, also, if you do want my thoughts on any of the slates where I don't have an episode, there's two ways you can get those. You can join the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Basically, it's a great community to be a part of where we got a lot of people in there who are chopping it up every day, talking plays, talking strategy, and then sweating it out together. It's a blast if you play college basketball DFS to be a part of that community. And then also, I do write a full article to my Patreon for every college basketball slate where I profile my core plays as well as kind of my lineup strategy and attack strategy for the slate. There's not a lot of people doing this for college basketball, so I do think I can give you guys some good information and help you get better at building lineups for college basketball DFS. All right, enough with the introduction. We went a little long, but hey, I'm excited. It's conference championship week, right? We're almost at that time that is March Madness. So let's go ahead and end the introduction there, and let's go ahead and kick things off with game number one in the Horizon League. All right, game number one on the slate is between Cleveland State and Oakland in the Horizon League. Now, this is a game between one team that was absolutely supposed to be here in Oakland. They're the one seed in this tournament. And then Cleveland State pulled off an upset over Youngstown State in the previous round. They were not supposed to be in this game. So it should come as no surprise that Oakland is, in fact, the favorite. KenPom has this game projected to be 76-72 in favor of Oakland. Now, these two teams did play twice already this season. They split the season series. Cleveland State won at their place 75-67, and then Oakland won at home 83-71. Now, for Cleveland State, what you're really going to need to make sure to know is whether or not Tristan Enaruna is playing. He is a Kansas transfer who is this team's best player, and he sat out their last game against Youngstown State, and I can't really find anything that indicates either way whether he's going to play in this next game or not. So just know that I think it's probably more likely than not that he doesn't play, given that he just missed a conference tournament game. Like, you don't sit out conference tournament games like for no reason. So I think it's more likely than not that he doesn't play. And what happened in the game that he missed was Tevin Smith moved into the starting lineup. He played 34 minutes, put up 32 fantasy points. That's pretty doggone good. It wasn't necessarily the highest usage rate in the world because Tay Williams was the guy who led them in usage rate. If you played college basketball DFS last year, you might remember Tay Williams Day, where the Horizon League games were on a Friday night slate, and Tay Williams was priced at $3,000 even, and he was one of their best players back last year as well. Well, guess what? He's back on a DraftKings slate. He led them in usage rate in that last game, was 5 for 13 from the field, put up 32 fantasy points at a salary of $7,200. We would absolutely be A-okay with that. But Drew Louder was actually the guy who led them in shots without Tristan Enaruna. He was 7 for 18 from the field. He can be a little more shot dependent than the likes of Tay Williams and Tristan Enaruna, but he is the guard for them that is going to be taking the most shots. Against Oakland earlier in the year, he put up 17 fantasy points, which is not great, but $6,400 and a guy who's going to take a ton of shots if Enaruna is out. I definitely like chances of Drew Louder hitting value as well. Now, Dylan Arnett was the guy that made up for it in rebounds because Tristan Enaruna is a great rebounder. And Arnett had 12 boards in that game, only put up 20 fantasy points, but he was dealing with a little bit of foul trouble. He had 4 fouls, but he still played 30 minutes. So this is a guy that I believe if Enaruna is out, stands to benefit the most. Not for a usage reason, but just because of those rebounds, and he's priced at only $5,500. So if he gives you another, like 8 and 12 type performance, maybe gets another assist, a block, or a steal, then he's easily going to be able to hit value at a salary of only $5,500. Now, Chase Robinson did play 32 minutes off the bench in that previous game. He's a guy who's a little more boom bust, but at $5,100, you're willing to definitely ride the booms, right? Against Youngstown State, he played 32 minutes and put up 34 fantasy points. So definitely a guy who gets consideration as well. Now, what's interesting is from a statistical standpoint, Oakland is bottom 5 in the nation in assist rate allowed. So they tend to give up a lot of assists on a lot of the buckets that they're scored against them. And that stands to benefit Enaruna if he plays, Tay Williams, Andrew Louder, all of them average over a 13% assist rate on the season, according to KenPom. So there's not really one guy that just dishes out a ton of assists, but all three of those guys stand to benefit pretty well. In addition to the other guys that I mentioned, if Enaruna does not play, it really brings into consideration Smith, Arnett, and Robinson. All right, now on the Oakland side, like I said, this is the best team. Dang it, DraftKings. This is the best team in the Horizon League. So it should come as no surprise that they are here in this game. And they have one of the best players in the Horizon League in Trey Townsend. He is their best overall player, and he is their leader in usage on the season. So when you look at Trey Townsend, I'm having a lot of trouble with my mouse right now if you're watching on YouTube. I don't know why. If you look at Trey Townsend, he is a pretty darn solid fantasy option. He put up 38 fantasy points in the last meeting against Cleveland State, which is pretty good. Anytime you're looking at a slate where you have a chance to get a team's best player, you can definitely take advantage of that. And at $8,000, he is a pretty safe option from a fantasy perspective, in my opinion. Now, after that, like the way you can attack this Cleveland State team is Cleveland State ranks outside the top 300 in offensive rebound rate allowed. So they give up a ton of offensive boards. Townsend is a guy who could take advantage of that. He did in that 38 fantasy point performance in the first meeting. Chris Conway is the other big that they play that could take advantage of that as well. He is a little bit erratic if you look at his game log. At $5,900, though, all you would need is about 24 to 26 fantasy points back, which he's hit 24 in 2 of his last 3 games. So if he does get a boost on the rebounding end, this is a guy that you can definitely like. He did return from injury. He was injured a little bit earlier in the season, but he is back now, and I would definitely feel comfortable rolling him out. Now, the shooters for this team are Jack Golke and Blake Lampin, and both of them are just guys who are going to let it fly. Like, they take a ton of three-pointers. I watched this Oakland team play Dayton earlier in the season, and back then they were taking a ton of three-pointers as well. So they're going to be a little boom or bust from a fantasy perspective. But we kind of talked about this with Keize Tominaga, who ended up going off today, is, if you're having a guy who is, DraftKings did it again. If you're having a guy who is going to take a ton of threes, and has the ability, has the ceiling to get absolutely scorching hot, they're guys that you certainly have to consider in your GPP lineups, and that's how I feel about Lampman and Golke. If I were to game stack this game, they would be 2 of the pieces that I would want in a game stacking lineup. Now, Rocket Watts is a guy that you have to pay attention to as well. He is a Michigan State transfer. Very rare when you see the transfer down to this level. He plays super erratic minutes. You never know how much he's going to play, but he actually leads the team in usage rate, and so when he's out there, he's going to have the ball in his hands. He's going to have opportunities to create and score. So at $4,500, I don't mind him as an option, but just know there's very little security there. DQ Cole is the 5th starter for this team. I kind of hadn't mentioned him yet because he's kind of the guy who gets his minutes taken from Rocket Watts, and in his fantasy performances tend to be a little boom or bust as well. I would probably be least likely to play him out of all the 5 starters we mentioned: Townsend, Golke, Conway, Lampman, and Cole. Cole would probably be the last one that I would be willing to play. All right, let's take a quick breather and let me figure out what's wrong with my mouse. If you're watching on YouTube, it's been all over the place. And then we will go ahead and continue with game number 2. All right, so I went with the old tried and true method of, turning it off and on, and hopefully that ended up working out. It does appear to be better now. What was happening with my mouse was it was acting like I was right clicking when I was left clicking, which is quite annoying when right clicking will take you back in the browser. So, I tried the first thing that every IT guy tells you to do on the phone. Have you tried turning it off and on? So yeah, I tried that, and hopefully we're working now. Hopefully we're good to go. So let's pick back up with game number 2. It is Santa Clara taking on St. Mary's. This one is projected to be 72-64 in favor of St. Mary's, and St. Mary's swept the season series 73-49 and 82-77. So a big discrepancy in the two game environments between those two games played. If it is like the first game, 73-49, it's very unlikely that there's a whole lot of fancy viable options from this game, period. But if it's like the second one, 82-77, it might be the game that you end up needing to stack. Now, Santa Clara is a team that dishes out a decent amount of fantasy points, and it's a pace up spot for St. Mary's. Santa Clara ranks 83rd in the nation in tempo. St. Mary's ranks 358th. There are only 4 teams in the nation slower than St. Mary's, and off the top of my head, I can't tell you all 4, but I know one of them's Virginia. So St. Mary's is not a team that you want to target for fantasy purposes at all. But fortunately for us, DraftKings knows that, and they priced all these Santa Clara guys down so that they're actually reasonable plays here on this slate. Now, I don't understand why Johnny O'Neal is their highest priced player. I really don't. Like, he has been good recently, I guess, but like, he doesn't lead them in usage rate. He's not super duper consistent. And a lot of his best games were when Adama Ball and Carlos Marshall missed due to injury, and both of them are back now. So, if you want to, count on Johnny O'Neal being on his recent hot streak, go for it. But the usage rate does not support it. The matchup does not support it. I don't get why he's priced where he is. Adama Ball is the guy who I would have at the highest price on this St. Mary's team. He is an Arizona transfer who is legitimately good at basketball. He is a very athletic wing who can also run the point. I really do like his game, and he leads the team in. He led the team in usage in their first conference tournament game against San Diego, put up 39 fantasy points in that game. I think he's a little bit of a misprice at $5,700. Granted, it's a tough matchup against St. Mary's, but this is a guy that based off his profile could very easily be like 6,500. Carlos Marshall, I also think, is a little bit of a misprice because he comes in at 5,300, averaging well over 4x value for his salary, and he is their second in command in usage on the season. He actually has a higher usage rate and shot rate than Adama Ball, but he generally plays less minutes. So, Ball, I would still consider as their best player, but Carlos Marshall does have these games when he plays a lot of minutes where he can go off. Now, it's also worth knowing that Brenton Napper missed last game for Santa Clara. Can't find anything on his status as to whether or not he's going to play in the next game, but it is interesting that Jalen Benjamin got the start in that game, and he is 4,100, and I think he's at a very reasonable price tag. He played 22 minutes in that game, had a 27% usage rate, put up 15 fantasy points. Granted, if you're thinking, well, Mike, that wasn't a whole lot. Well, he was 1 for 7 from the field, and that's not normally what he is. So, if he just goes 3 for 7 and makes it, 19 or 20 fantasy points at a salary of $4,100, we're looking at this in a lot different ways. So if Napper is out again, I do think you can definitely go to Jalen Benjamin as the spot starter. Now, Tyree Bryan also played 28 minutes off the bench in that game. He is another one of these guards for Santa Clara, put up 24 fantasy points against San Diego in those 28 minutes. Granted, could that have been a little bit because it was a blowout? I think that's a possibility. He does tend to see a decent amount of run in blowout games, so I would be a little bit more cautious on that. But definitely Benjamin and Bryan do have to be in play for you. Christoph Tilley is their big man who does not play a ton of minutes, but actually has a massive usage rate. But like St. Mary's is a terrible matchup for bigs. And if he's only going to play 20 to 25 minutes, how much upside does he have? Really, he's not one of my favorite plays, but I did have to mention him because he does have an incredible usage rate when he's out on the floor, which is not as often as we would like. Now, St. Mary's, on the other hand, is a team where they're very interesting to look at. Okay, so last season, Aiden Mahaney was kind of their point guard. He was kind of their guy offensively. But this year, it has been Augustus Murcielalunas, son of, what was his first name? Sarunas Murcielalunas, who played for the Golden State Warriors in the early 90s. I don't remember his first name, but it was Murcielalunas, because how can you forget that last name, right? Now, he has been their usage leader on the season, and he has put up 38 and 27 in the 2 matchups against Santa Clara. And if it's closer to 38, that's a guy that we definitely like to consider. He's shown a lot of upside with 40 fantasy points in his last 3 games. Augustus Murcielalunas definitely in my player pool with this pace up spot that he's got and the usage rate that he's shown. Now, Aiden Mahaney, Hasn't just disappeared though. Like, he's still a focal part of their offense. He actually leads St. Mary's in shot rate. In fact, in their most recent game against Gonzaga, he took 19 shots, but he has had just not as good a fantasy production as Mercy Lunis, because Mercy Lunis has done a lot more in the peripheral stats. In the 2 games against Santa Clara, it has been 23 and 18 for Mahaney, which is just not great. It's okay, but it's not something that we're really going to be running to play. I would tend to only play one of those 2 guys, if I'm being honest. Now, also, Mitchell Saxon is their big man, and he is a pretty big man, and he is their primary guy down low and primary rebounder. And he had 25 and 27 in the 2 matchups against Santa Clara this season. And what's interesting with St. Mary's, though, is that they had an injury to Josh Jefferson, who was one of their better players, probably their 3rd best player, if I'm being honest. And he has not played in the last 5 games. And in those last 5 games, Mitchell Saxon has been pretty good. He's been over 30 fantasy points in 3 of those 5 games. He's been over 37 in 2 of those 5 games. So definitely like the fact that we're getting a guy with a little bit of boosted usage with Joshua Jefferson being out. And oh, by the way, the guy who has moved into the starting lineup with Jefferson being out has been Mason Forbes. He's a word of caution, though, he's only hit 4x value once in those 5 games, and it was 23 fantasy points in a blowout against Pepperdine. He's just not a super high usage player, but he's going to play a ton of minutes, especially as long as Jefferson continues to be out. And then Alex Dukas is another guy who has benefited big time with Jefferson being out of the lineup. In the 5 games that Jefferson has been out, Dukas has averaged 31 fantasy points per game. That is over 4x value, and that definitely brings him into consideration as we are getting a pace up spot against Santa Clara. And then the only other guy who really ever plays is Luke Barrett. He's like the only bench player that plays now for them. And he's been hit or miss since the Josh Jefferson injury. He did put up 32 fantasy points against Pepperdine on 28 minutes, but that game was definitely a big time blowout. So if you think this game gets a little bit out of hand, then Luke Barrett might be your guy. Or if you think that St. Mary's is going to be dealing with foul trouble, Luke Barrett might be your guy. But I would not play anybody below him, because just none of them are getting consistent minutes. All right, that does it with game number 2. So let's go ahead and take another quick breather, and then we'll talk about games 3 and 4. Now, while we are closing in on these final 2 games, y'all, if you like what you're seeing here on the YouTube video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out a ton, and I cannot express you guys enough how much I appreciate it when you guys do that. And if you were listening on audio, you can go ahead and rate and review the audio version as well. Again, I cannot stress it enough. It really helps me out when you guys do that. It helps the podcast show up on searches, helps the video show up on searches. So like on Spotify right now, if you search College Basketball DFS, we are the #1 podcast that pops up. And that could not be possible without you guys' help. So I really appreciate it. Appreciate if you guys do that. If you like what you see here in the video, it just helps me out a ton. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at game number 3, which is Northern Kentucky taking on Milwaukee. Now, KenPom has this game projected to be 77-75 in favor of Northern Kentucky. This is the highest game total on the slate, according to KenPom, at 152 points. And these 2 teams split the season series. Northern Kentucky won 90-72, and Milwaukee won 73-72. So it appears the losing team got to at least 72 points in both games. There's something to be said for that, right? Now, for Northern Kentucky, they are very much a 2-man band of Marcus Warwick and Trey Robinson. Now, what's interesting is this. Sam Vinson was their best player, and he got injured much earlier in the season. So the fantasy points per game numbers that you see on DraftKings, those are going to be a little bit deflated for literally everybody else, because when Sam Vinson was playing, he was taking up so much of their usage, and he was putting up a lot of fantasy points. Now, Marcus Warwick is the guy who probably has the best statistical profile on the team. He has a 27% usage rate and a 30% shot rate on the season. And from a fantasy scoring perspective, he's put up 40 fantasy points in 3 straight and 4 of 5. So this is a guy who right now has taken a ton of shots. He's not exactly getting a whole lot of peripherals right now, but he has just scored the ball so well that you have to consider him, just because you hope he can just continue this torrid pace up scoring. Now, Trey Robinson is the much better peripheral stat guy. He only has a 21% usage rate on the season, but he has significantly better rebounding rates, and also the assist rate's about even. So I definitely like what he's done lately as well. He appears to be a perfect cash game play, in my opinion. His last 6 games have all been above 31 fantasy points. He's a guy that he gets enough shots that he's consistently involved in the offense, and he's good enough of a rebounder and an assist guy, and will even get you a few steals as well, almost averages 2 a game, that his fantasy scoring is pretty darn consistent at that salary of $7,800. I really do like both the top options in this game. Now, the other 3 starters for them are Bradley, Pettis, and Wells, but I gotta be honest, they're all inconsistent at best players who are priced for their ceiling. I mean, obviously, I think Bradley is the best one of them. He's the one that's priced the highest. He had 31 fantasy points in their last game against Wright State, put up 17, 3, and 4 on 7 for 12 shooting. He's got decent usage and shot rates, but I just, at $7,100, I just can't get there. If he were $6,100, I'd be all over him. Pettis is pretty much the same way. He's a guy who has a legitimate ceiling, but just not really any consistent way to get there. In their most recent game, he put up 31 fantasy points. A few games going against IUPUI also had 30 fantasy points. But in between those two, he had 13, 11, and 7. So just not really anything consistent there to bank off of. And then Wells, also LJ Wells is the third, really the fifth starter for them. He is their big man, and he kind of lets a lot of the guards do the rebounding in Warwick and Robinson. So he doesn't have massive rebounding rates. He doesn't have massive shot rates either. But at the price tag, that's not unreasonable for $6,200. And so I would be absolutely A-OK to play LJ Wells. I would probably be significantly more likely to play him than Pettis. Now, another guy to look out for, this is pretty much the only guy who plays, there's 2 guys, who play a lot of minutes off the bench. The first one of them is Jeremiah Israel, but he doesn't really, he's not super involved in the offense, doesn't have a lot of fantasy production. But Kian Itajire, and I know I butchered that name, but Itajire is a guy who does play consistently off the bench. He had missed a few games prior to their conference tournament opener against Wright State, and if he's all the way back, he's a little bit of a misprice at $3,600 on DraftKings. So I think he's one of the premier value plays of the slate. He only played 16 minutes in that game against Wright State, only put up 7 fantasy points, but this is a guy who has been 20 plus minutes pretty darn regularly during the season, over 20 fantasy points pretty regularly during the season as well. So he's a guy that I am definitely going to pencil in as one of my favorite value plays of the slate, of which there are not many because so many of these teams play short rotations. Now, on the Milwaukee side, everything starts with BJ Freeman. He is their point forward. He is their leader in scoring and rebounding and usage, and assists and usage. So basically, he is 9th in the country at almost a 33% usage rate. He has been so good from a fantasy perspective. I think you could argue he's a bit of a misprice at $8,800. He's been over 50 fantasy points in 3 straight games. Not only has it been 3 straight, but 4 of 5 and 5 of 7. So you're over 50 fantasy points in 5 of your last 7 games. That's a big enough sample size for me to think, okay, yeah, he's probably going to get to 50 or close to 50 again. And if you look at the amount of shots he's taken, it should come as no surprise, right? Like he regularly takes over 20 shots in a game. I think he is the premier play on the slate. He's going to be popular, but like I said, I'd play him if he were at 9,500, not 8,800. Now, Pratt and Fields are the other 2 guys on this team, other 2 starters on this team who are above 20% usage. Faison Fields is a really solid rebounder. He's got really good rebounding rates. With him, it had really just been the minutes that he plays preventing him from getting to his ceiling. But like now it's conference tournament season. Now you're going to let your best players play a lot. And the game against Green Bay was evidence of that. He played 30 minutes and put up 34 fantasy points. He is probably my second favorite play on this Milwaukee side after BJ Freeman. Now, after that, we got to talk about Pratt. So Pratt is the other guy with over a 20% usage rate. He's really one of the other guys on this team that can really generate his own shot in addition to BJ Freeman. So he's a guy that I would have a little bit of consideration for as well. In the previous game against Northern Kentucky, he put up 27 fantasy points. And his salary is $6,800. We would be A-OK with getting 27 fantasy points from that. And it appears that my mouse is acting up again. There we go. Now, the other 2 starters are Pullian and Ham, and I kind of feel the same way about those 2 that I feel about the peripheral Northern Kentucky starters. They do have a legitimate ceiling, but they're priced up for that ceiling, not what they have done in recent games. Now, the guy that interests me a lot, this guy's really boom or bust, is Elijah Jameson. He has a 21% usage rate on the season, but he does come off the bench. So the minute totals that he gets, as well as kind of the shot totals and the fantasy point totals that he gets, can be really inconsistent. But that usage rate's pretty appetizing at $5,400. He's a guy that I would definitely be considering as one of the value plays on this slate. I think if you were fading BJ Freeman, that he would be one of the guys you'd be most likely to want in your lineup because he is one of those guys that can go get his own shot outside of BJ Freeman. Now, the only other guy that really plays off the bench, well, they're inconsistent with their bench after that. Wilson, Langston Wilson does play a decent amount of minutes. He's not a terrible option. But Learic Davis was the guy who played the most bench minutes in the last game outside of Elijah Jameson. He played 19 minutes against Green Bay, put up 12 fantasy points, but it was kind of out of nowhere. He hadn't played more than 19 minutes in a game since against Cleveland State back earlier in February. And in fact, the last game against Northern Kentucky was the start of his slump. He only played 6 minutes, only put up 2 fantasy points. But this is a guy who has had some big time performances earlier in the season, though. So, on a slate that's so bereft of value at only $4,000 in a great game environment, maybe he's a guy that might be worth taking a chance on. All right, now let's head on to the last game of the night. San Francisco taking on Gonzaga. And if it feels like these two teams just played, it's because they did literally. Last Thursday night they played. Not last Thursday night, 2 Thursday nights ago, March 1st. So KenPom has this one projected to be 78-71 in favor of Gonzaga. Gonzaga has the highest team total on the slate, and it should come as no surprise seeing what they did to the Dons in the regular season. Gonzaga won 77-72 and 86-68. Now on the San Francisco side, Jonathan Mobo is their best player. He has almost a 25% usage rate on the season. He has definite NBA level skills that are going to allow him to make that jump to the next level if he wants to in the offseason. But Gonzaga has given him a little bit of issues. He's only had 31 and 26 fantasy points in the 2 games against Gonzaga. And I gotta say, if he were 7,300, not 8,300, I'd be all over him. But $8,300, this matchup against Gonzaga, with there being a lot of other options in the 8K range that I like Trey Townsend, like BJ Freeman, he's largely going to be a pass for me on this slate. Now, Marcus Williams does barely edge out Mobo in terms of usage on the season. Marcus Williams is slightly above 25% usage. And I got to say, he would be more likely a play for me than Jonathan Mobo. At a salary of only $7,100, he put up 31 fantasy points and 31 fantasy points against Gonzaga in their 2 meetings this season. I think you can definitely attack Gonzaga on the periphery more than on the interior. So he is a guy that I would definitely be considering from this San Francisco side, especially as a game stacking option. Now, after that, Nedwedo Newberry is a big man who is inconsistent at best, but when he's good, he's real good. In his last 5 games, he's had 2 games over 28 fantasy points, but the downside is the other 3 have all been under 11. So just not a super consistent player. And against Gonzaga, it's the exact same way. He had 5 fantasy points in their most recent meeting, but 30 in their meeting before that. Gonzaga plays a super big lineup, though. And so a guy like Newberry, who is very athletic, very big, is going to be needed to play a lot of minutes against this Gonzaga front line that is so stout. And so I definitely think that he's in line to play a lot of minutes if he can stay on the floor, stay out of foul trouble. And we know that he has a legitimate ceiling. He's a guy that I'm definitely willing to take shots at in GPPs. Now, after that, on the wings for them, they give a lot of guys minutes. Malik Thomas, Mike Sharp-Jumps, and Ryan Beasley are all going to split minutes on the wings. And they just, it's kind of the same story that I said with those Horizon League guys in the previous game. Like, they're guys who have a ceiling, but are priced up for that ceiling, not what they do game in and game out. Now, both Ryan Beasley and Malik Thomas did have 1 good game against Gonzaga and struggled in the other game. Mike Sharp-Jumps struggled in both of those games. And I watched Mike Sharp-Jumps at Dayton last year, and I liked his game, but one of his issues transitioning to the college level was he is very slender, and he is not really able to guard bigger bodied wings, but he's also not laterally quick enough to guard like super hyper athletic wings. On the offensive end, he's very skilled. He's got a mid-range game. He's a great ball handler, but on the defensive end, he kind of plays his own way off the floor because he just doesn't really have a matchup for this Gonzaga team. So he would be a guy that I would probably not be playing a lot of. I'd be more inclined to play Thomas or Beasley from the wing spots for this San Francisco side. Now, a name to watch out for is Isaiah Hawthorne. So he had a concussion in February and did not play for like half the month. has played in their last 2 games, only played 2 minutes and 1 minute. But if you go back and look at his game log, he has these, more regular minute totals, more regular fantasy point productions, and he's the bare minimum at $3,000. And he's got some legitimate size that, like I said, San Francisco is going to need some size to deal with this Gonzaga team. And so I think he's a guy that at the bare minimum $3,000, I think he's at least, if you're doing a 20 max in a GPP, I think he's worth putting in at least one of your lineups just to see if maybe there is in fact something there. Kunin and Todorovic are also kind of in the same boat. I think judging by Hawthorne's body of work over the course of the whole season, I would rather play Hawthorne, but Kunin and Todorovic would also be guys that could play minutes, if they're needed for their size. Now, on the Gonzaga side, if I can get this straight, it keeps highlighting San Francisco. All right, so on the Gonzaga side, what's interesting is they have gone super starting 5 heavy in the last few games. Graham Ike is a guy that has always had a big usage rate over the course of the whole season, even dating back to when he was at Wyoming. But what was keeping him from reaching his fantasy ceiling this year was his minutes played. He just had these games where he'd randomly play like 24 or 14 minutes or 23. Like, he just didn't play consistent big-time minutes. Well, guess what? Now he is. Last game against San Francisco, played 28 minutes, and it would have been more if that game was closer, and put up 41 fantasy points. And so I really do like Graham Ike at the forward spot at 8,100. Considering BJ Freeman gets dual eligibility, he's probably my second favorite option at the forward spot in the 8K range. Now, Ryan Nembhard is an assist-dependent player. So if you were looking to stack this Gonzaga team up, he would be a guy that I would go with. He averages 6.4 assists per game. He's got a 28% assist rate on the whole season. That's really good. And so I definitely think that he could be a guy that you could go with. In the last game against San Francisco, 34 fantasy points, and added a little bit more as a scorer in their most recent game against St. Mary's, putting up 44 fantasy points. So I think he's a guy that I would definitely be considering if I were to be stacking up multiple guys on this Gonzaga side. And then one of those guys would be Anton Watson. Gonzaga has gone to this hyper big lineup recently where Anton Watson, who's really more of a 4, has been playing the 3, and it started off really good for his fantasy production, but in recent games it's been a little bit less, but it's been because so much of it has been going to Graham Ike, so I probably wouldn't be pairing those two guys together. Ben Gregg has been playing the 4 in this hyper big lineup, and he has been up and down. 3 of his last 4 games have been over 26 fantasy points, but unfortunately the one that was under was 14 fantasy points against San Francisco. So when you have these Gonzaga bigs, I got to be honest, when it comes to Ike, Watson, and Gregg, I'm probably only playing one of them per lineup, if I'm being honest. That's just really my thoughts on it. I don't really see an environment where 2 or even 3 of those guys end up hitting value. I'd probably pair one of them with Nembhard, or maybe even pair one of them with Nolan Hickman, who has been more of a scoring guard for Gonzaga lately. Hickman is not the peripheral stats player that the Nembhard is. In the last game against San Francisco, though, Hickman did have 33 fantasy points on 22 points. So not a whole lot of peripherals, but he did have, a big time scoring game. And then the only guys that play off the bench for this Gonzaga team, Braden Huff will pretty much spell the bigs. Dusty Stromer will spell the guards, but neither of those guys have a sizable enough role that I'm going to consider them at those salaries. If you want to take a shot on them in a GPP, I wouldn't be super duper opposed to it. Stromer had 10 and 14 fantasy points in the 2 meetings against San Francisco, whereas Huff had 6 and 5 fantasy points in the 2 meetings against San Francisco. All right, so that does it for the Monday night slate. So that does it for all 4 games. Remember, if you like what you see here on the video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel as well. We're closing in on our goal of 500 subscribers, and I really do appreciate it when you guys do that. And if you want more from me, there are a few places where you can get that. You can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'll tweet out all updates to the show, as well as I'm more than happy to answer any lineup questions or anything you may have. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. We mentioned that at the top. I cannot recommend that enough if you're looking for a community to talk about college basketball DFS with. And then I do have the articles on the Patreon for every college basketball slate if you're looking to know who actually makes my lineups. All right, so that does it for this episode, y'all. Quick reminder, I will probably not be here for the Tuesday night slate because I will be doing the golf show, but I hope to be back for the rest of the week, as well as next week, as well as doing some bracket breakdowns and previews next week. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Got a lot of content coming your way. This is the first of two really big weeks for us in terms of college basketball content. So make sure you're subscribed, make sure you're here for it. You're not going to want to miss it. And hopefully I'm going to be giving you guys plenty of information that's going to help you win a lot of money here this March Madness season. So best of luck to you guys here on the Monday Night Slate. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you next time.